It's time to talk about evictions in this country and the landslide of evictions we're about to face. Because as Congress right now grapples with what to do with this stimulus package, and should we give people $1,200? Should we give them $1,000? Should we give people a recurring check of $2,000? Look, the answer is people are going to be out of their homes in a few short weeks because many people have not been able to get caught up on their rent over the past few months. Let's just go into some of the data here, and it's really troubling. In April, about a third of Americans missed their rent payment. Then in May, about 20% of Americans missed their rent payment. Then in June, another 30% of Americans missed their housing payments. And in July, another 32% of people missed their rent payments. So what does that tell you about the need for an extension of a rental moratorium? I don't see anybody talking about this on the Republican side. The only place I've seen this is on the Democrat side in their HEROES Act, which would give $100 billion to help people pay their rent. That's dead on arrival, and Republicans have no plans, from what I can tell, in their stimulus scaffolding right now to pass any kind of rental assistance or landlord assistance. So let's dissect this a little bit. There are estimates that in the next few weeks, we could see upwards of 28 million Americans get evicted from their homes. Just wrap your head around that. Think about that for a second, because back in 2008, we had about 10 million people lose their homes. 10 million. This is almost triple that amount. Think about that for a second. 28 million Americans thrown out of their homes. Grover is totally disgusted by it. These moratoriums are set to expire in a few days, and in some states they've already expired. We need an extension of eviction moratoriums in this country immediately. I don't see Republicans talking about this at all. If I go through their bill, I don't see any of it. Schools reopening, liability protection, direct stimulus payments to the American people, and the fact that they're squabbling over $1,200 for the American people right now, that money is going to be eaten up in a matter of days if that check goes out. I mean, just let me know in the comments. How many of you, if you get that check, already have it spent? You've got to pay a mortgage, you've got to pay rent, you've got to buy groceries. It's going to be gone immediately, am I right? You're not going to be sitting on this money, going and playing the lottery or something stupid. You're going to be spending it. And sadly, rent in the United States, the average rent in a property for the average American is about $1,000 a month. It's like $1,078 is the average cost for rental in this country. So the fact that we're, quibbling, squabbling, whatever you want to call it, over $1,200 a month, or one payment for a stimulus plan, it's going to be spent almost immediately on rent. We have an affordable housing crisis in this country because Americans, they're spending more than almost 50%. The average American who is lower income is spending upwards of 50% of their income on housing. Middle class Americans spend about a third of their income on housing. If you look at that data again, in April, a third of Americans couldn't pay their rent. In May, 20%. June, 30%. A third. And now in July, a third couldn't pay their rent. So when these moratoriums are lifted, what's going to happen is these people are going to be expected to get caught up on their rent. They're going to be told, moratorium is up. You have to pay your rent or you're going to have to leave. And they need to be able to get this money. How are they going to do it? I don't know. Where are they going to get it when their job is gone as well? I don't know. The only reason these people are still in their homes is because of these eviction moratoriums. Now, granted, some cities have put their own eviction moratoriums in place, but we need something at a federal level to protect people right now, to make sure that even if they can't pay their rent, they don't get thrown out onto the street. It's not just a single guy sitting there drinking beers, watching Netflix. It's, single moms with 2 kids at home who live in a certain school district because that's where they moved to provide their kids with a great education in that particular school district. They lose an address, they lose the ability to stay in that same school district. This is not, like I said, just some dude, some 30-year-old guy sitting there drinking beers, living off the land. And I'm sure there are people like that. There's always going to be people like that, right? But there's also really hardworking Americans who are suffering big time right now because of this. Again, I don't see anybody talking about this other than what the Democrats have put forward inside the HEROES Act. So I sure as heck hope that the Democrats have a backbone and fight them on this. But if there are multiple bills being foisted right now by the Senate, where do you put this in? Because if you've got a bill right now for schools reopening, getting back to work, if you've got a bill in there for liability protection, where do you put this in? Where's the bill for rent and landlords? I don't see it. So how do you fight them on this? Look, just for some context here, this is a lot different than 2008. 2008, when we had our housing crisis, it was because of predatory lending. It was because people couldn't pay their mortgages, they lost their jobs. Lenders were basically giving, loans to people with, all you had to have was a pulse, not even a job. There's reports of people, they literally had come from Honduras, bought a house, didn't even have like a paycheck to show, were able to buy a house. Bank was like, sure, I'll sign the mortgage. And then they sell it immediately, these mortgage-backed securities, right? And then they were there for like 2 months just doing work on a project, and they went back to Honduras, and the house just sat there, went into foreclosure, and was gone. And then, weeds growing up through the sidewalk, and that was it. That person could leave, didn't have to pay a thing. That's what we were dealing with in 2008. So we saw a different type of housing crisis then, because what happened then was the houses then went into foreclosure, and people were pushed into the rental market. People lost their jobs because big banks collapsed and all sorts of problems, right? That's how people ended up without homes back then. Now it's a totally different scenario. Now it's very difficult to get a loan. Now, through no fault of their own, they find themselves unemployed, unable to make that monthly rent payment, and now homeless as a result because their boss had to shut down their business. They don't have a paycheck anymore, and the United States government has been absolutely terrible at dealing with this response to help the little guy, to help low and middle income Americans right now. It's incredibly important that Congress does something about this. This is going to be a disaster of epic proportions. So again, the numbers are upwards of 28 million Americans could be thrown out of their homes in the next few weeks unless there's some sort of national mandate, some sort of extension at the federal level on these moratoriums. Because you have certain cities like San Francisco and New York that had extended moratoriums on this, but you can only go so long. The other problem with this potential housing crisis right now is not just the renter, it's the landlord. I know it's hard to be sometimes sympathetic to the landlord, but look, I'm a landlord, and we've worked with tenants who got behind on rent. We didn't kick people out. But as a landlord, it's not rich guys floating around and flying jets everywhere. The average landlord in this country has like one rental property. They maybe inherited the property or they owned it for years, and this is how they make their income. They provide a house and have a tenant living in that property. The average landlord is not wealthy, and many times they actually have a mortgage on that property. The average landlord has a mortgage on the property. They maybe bought it, fixed it up, provided a great place to live for someone, have great tenants in the property, but guess what? When the tenant stops paying rent, our heart goes out to them, but at the same time, that landlord cannot pay rent now to the bank. And the banks aren't working with us anymore on how to get this thing extended. And I'm saying us, me, I'm saying in general, us. They had 3 months where they were allowing people to, do mortgage forbearance. And once that time was already up. So a lot of times that mortgage forbearance was already gone. It's already dried up, and we've already been through how many months now, right? This thing, March, April, May, June, 5 months into this thing already. So mortgage forbearance is not there anymore. And that means that those individuals that can't pay their mortgage, there's going to be a foreclosure crisis in this country. You see the cascade effects here? These things do not just happen in a bubble. And I don't understand what the federal government is doing right now. I do not understand, cannot wrap my head around what Congress is thinking about this. How in the world do you not see this coming? I'm telling you, it's like a train barreling down on us right now, folks. People lose their homes. Tenants can't pay their rent. They get booted out of their property. The person who then has to have a deal with a tenant turnover in the property, has to pay the money to get someone evicted in the first place, is facing a foreclosure because they can't pay their mortgage payment that they were counting on from the tenant in the property. And then the banks. What's going to happen to the banks? They've already set aside upwards of $50 billion because they know it's coming. JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, right, from Chase Bank, he said, we've seen this coming. We see it coming. They've set aside $50 billion just to deal with all of these foreclosures that are about to hit. Literally, $50 billion being set aside for this right now. It's coming, folks. We are facing a major housing crisis, and we better buckle up and be prepared for it while our government sits back and does absolutely nothing. They're doing nothing. But you can do something. You can smash this like button on our video here and share this video with someone that you think could, use this knowledge right now about what's happening in our economy. Share it with your landlord. Share it with your family. Get this message out there. And thank you so much for subscribing to the channel. I really appreciate it.